Well, okay. So we'll get started and we'll just catch up as people come in. I want to talk to you about transfer students today. And I know this is kind of a hot topic in our world right now. So my goal today is just to first provide you information about transfer, but also kind of allow you to exercise your brain in the way that you think about transfer. Because what we know at our own institution or nationally isn't always the same thing that we see every day in our very specific area of work. So first this is what we'll talk about today. I want to show you some key findings on what transfer is like today, but then I want to take it back a step and look at the history of community colleges, because I think that will kind of guide our understanding on where we've been and then where we've come today. Then we'll talk about some transfer supports and barriers, research and findings, and then take a closer look at some characteristics. And in that green box there, this was my dissertation topic. And so this is the study that I did, and that's what I'll be presenting today. So it is pretty research heavy, but if numbers scare you, it's okay. I will talk you through it and kind of make it easier to digest. But that is the title. You can Google it if you really want to take a deep dive into transfer student characteristics and retention and graduation. So first, I want to start with where we're at today with transfer in our nation. And I'll go through these, but I will warn you, it's pretty bleak. And these findings are not going to bring you a lot of joy, but that's why we need to work on this. So this is a report from the National Student Clearinghouse, and it just came out this past September, so September 2022. And if you haven't really dug into the National Student Clearinghouse reports, you should. They have a lot of reports that come out every few years. I think tracking transfer is what a lot of them are called. And they have things that are not transfer. So look it up. But first, nationally, higher education experienced a big loss in transfer students, a loss of 13%. All transfer pathways were impacted. There probably isn't one institution that's on this call or really anywhere across the nation that is saying, yeah, we did just fine. Student persistence also declined when students transferred. The biggest decline was in that first year and that initial transfer. And then when they go into year two, there's a little bit of bounce back, a little bit of recovery, but still younger students, 20 years old and younger, students that are seeking bachelor's degrees, and students at not private nonprofit four-year institutions, we're still pretty hurt, even though they did a little bit better. Students over the age of 20, so our adult learners, which account for 85% of transfer students, still had a great decline, which is actually more than twice the rate of our traditional or younger students. And then white, Black, and Native American transfer students all declined significantly over the last 2 years. If you dug into this and did more research, there are many reasons why. We were going through a pandemic, equity and equality, internet access. There are a lot of things to consider in these areas. But what we know is that there was a steep decline. So really, based on these findings, we really are nationally in a transfer student crisis. There's a real problem that needs to be solved. And while transfer might be a topic of conversations, I don't think it is the conversation that is happening at institutions when really it should be. So I said we were going to take a look back, and here's a little bit of a timeline of community colleges. And there are a lot more numbers and dates that could be on here, but here are some biggies. So first, in 1893, I called this the panic. In the late 19th century or early 19th century, we're seeing an economic downturn. And there's a little bit of a panic of what are we going to do to stimulate our economy? So Reverend Carroll, he was the president of Baylor University at the time, and he convened all the Baptist colleges in Texas and Louisiana. And together they recognized that there really wasn't enough money or enough students to support many small institutions spread across these two states. So instead, Carroll proposed that these small colleges reduce their curriculum to the first 2 years of study and then rely on Baylor, the big institution, to provide their students with the third or fourth years of the baccalaureate degree. So that's really where the two-year college and transfer was born. They figured out that by limiting the curriculum to the first 2 years, the colleges required fewer teachers, fewer resources, and fewer students to operate. So that's kind of where it started. And then a few years later, in 1901, Gillette Junior College in Illinois became the first community college, but they weren't called community colleges at the time. They were called junior colleges. So these junior colleges were often structured within public high schools. They were not the community college that we know today. They were really marketed as grades 13th and 14th right out of high school. And they weren't designed to push students up to that baccalaureate degree like Carroll had proposed. Really, they were marketed towards students that weren't seeking a bachelor's degree. Generally, they provided lower cost programs and really marketed toward low ability, part-time, minority, and low income students who otherwise probably wouldn't have sought out an opportunity in higher education. We continue on, the idea is really catching on, and in 1920, the American Association of Community College was founded. So we're really starting to see an organized body connecting these junior colleges. And this is linking those high schools that are providing those junior college 13th and 14th grades, women's colleges, military institutes, private junior college, and technical institutes. And by 1930, there were over 440 of these junior colleges across 45 states. And they had an approximate enrollment of 70,000 students. So it's growing significantly, and course offerings are growing in popularity. Junior colleges were starting to move out of those high schools and become standalone institutions. And still, they focused on vocational, continuing education, and job skill courses. And that really served the community and the workforce. So this is probably sounding more like the community college that we know today. In 1947, President Truman really helped really market the community college through the Truman Commission report. And he called for a lot of changes in post-secondary education. And a big part of that was really establishing this network of community colleges and saying that youth can profit from such an education. And so he really helped push these community college and the idea of community college up in importance in the Americans' mind. And during that expansion, community colleges continued to get on the same page and promised to serve and meet the community needs by providing adult education. So they really started to become an open education access point, and the idea that anyone can get a college education, it's not just for the elite, really started, this idea started gaining momentum across the country. In the 60s and 70s, again, enrollment continued to tick up, but part-time flexibility became very popular. Historically, if a student wanted to attend college, they would graduate high school and attend full-time before entering the workforce or going off on any career endeavors. But now part-time enrollment became very appealing to workforce professionals, and community colleges started a few years back doing this. So they were experts in it, where four-year institutions were still trying to adapt to this idea of part-time enrollment. 70s and 80s, education boomed still, and community college started to provide wraparound services. So this is probably, if there are any student professionals out there, this is probably when your area really started getting started, because they knew that community college couldn't just provide the education. There are more services that students need, right? Um, where are we at? 2004, the Lumina Foundation launched Achieving the Dream, the community college initiative, which really highlighted not only do we want students to attend community colleges as an opportunity, but we're really starting to care about their success. We not only want them to go, we want them to finish and then progress towards a baccalaureate degree. And then in 2016, community college is really the first stop for a lot of students. Among all students who completed a degree at a four-year college in 2015 and 16, 49% of them had enrolled at a two-year college in the previous 10 years. And now, I left that off the timeline because I think we can all put the pieces together at this point that community colleges are one of the largest education enterprises in the United States. And they've become so through this historical timeline and by providing the open access educational opportunities to low income and other underrepresented groups. So I've taken you through many, many, many years. We started in the 1800s. So why are national transfer rates still low? Shouldn't we be experts at this point? While the intention to earn a bachelor's degree among community college students remains high, so 80% of them want to earn that bachelor's degree, actually only about a quarter of those, 17%, complete a bachelor's degree. And that's a national statistic, but the Oklahoma number is pretty on par. I think it's closer to 15%. So 80% want to get a bachelor's degree, but only 15 to 17% are actually completing it. So in this slide, here are just some trends on what's happening and just some things to keep in the back of your mind as we continue talking today. The first is non-traditional has become the new traditional. And I know I've already said it in this presentation a few times, but if you're using the word traditional at your institution, maybe consider not doing that anymore. and that's easier said than done. It's really a definition and ingrained into our brains when we talk about students. So when we talk about the traditional student, it's widely defined. I mean, it actually has a definition. And it's students that are between 18 to 20 years old. They're financially dependent on their parents. They're enrolled in college full-time, and they're usually living on campus if you have a residential facility. However, as few as 16% of college students today fit that mold, only 16%. So if only 16% of college students are meeting that demographic, how can it really be the traditional? So just question that a little bit. There's a huge technology shift, whether you work at a college institution or really you're working anywhere. I think you've been able to see this technology shift in our world. So college campuses are now featuring very high-tech innovation labs, digital campsites, and they're utilizing technology in the classroom every single day. It's really is the new normal. In 2011, the Pew Research Center said that 46% of the people that took the survey had taken an online class in the last 10 years. So not only is technology in the classroom a normal, taking an online class without ever stepping foot on campuses for almost 50% of these survey respondents. In another survey, they surveyed their online students, and they found that 30% of them had never even set foot in a classroom, and they probably wouldn't ever if they were going to be able to finish their coursework. Next is politics and funding. When I first made the slide, I listed politics in one bullet point, and then I listed funding in a different bullet point. And then as I was really thinking about it, I thought, well, that's silly because politics generate our funding, and they really go hand in hand. So politically in our world, we're really having to defend higher education and have people see the value in that. There are many quick ways to get an education, quicker ways, but are they really the most effective? Will they give you the most long-term gains? And that's really a place that we haven't done in our history before. Higher education has been revered as a way to work your way up the social and economic ladder, but now we're kind of having to defend that. It's a tough spot. And I also want to say, when it comes to politics, being able to provide the accurate information to defend that stance can be tough. Community colleges are largely made up of non-resident, part-time, older, non-white, and working students. This population is hard to study because they're not around and they're less involved in the things that we do. And so typically when you're looking at these big research numbers, in these surveys, we're getting our information from the students that are willing to take it. So that's automatically skewing the survey, and we might not have as much information as we think that we do, as much correct information. And last is stigma and partnership. We talked about how community colleges or junior colleges started in high school, still that stigma that they might be less than or of lower importance than a four-year institution. And really that's not the case anymore. They're large, they're well-established, and evidence indicates that community college students who transfer to a four-year institution have equal to or higher graduation rates of students that enrolled right out of high school. So really that stigma of community college not being as important has really gone away in the data, but not always in people's minds. And then partnership, I feel like, goes with stigma just because the completion rates historically have been the community college's problem. The four-year institutions felt like, well, why aren't you sending us the students? It must be the community college's fault. But now we're seeing kind of this revelation in higher education where the four-year institutions are feeling a little bit more invested in this problem. They need those community college students. And they found that working together and in partnership really is a big gain for both sides. And if you're familiar with the work of the Tulsa Higher Education Consortium, which we can talk about later if you want, that really is the idea around it. It's a win-win for everyone as we can move our students around the system. So next, I'm going to present to you a few research supports, and I put those in quotes on purpose, and then maybe some barriers. And so, and let me correct, I won't actually talk about the supports because that's not what we're here to talk about today. When I looked at research for transfer, there's a lot of supports out there, but there's not a lot of research that's talking about the barriers. And kind of my argument is, how can you really create an effective support system if you don't know what the barriers are for your students? And so when it comes to supports, and when you're researching and looking what other institutions do or looking what the literature says, which is the first thing we do when we want to start a support, I just want to warn you to be cautious and pay attention to the sample that was used. A lot of these supports are designed for a very specific population of transfer student, or they have a very specific ecosystem. So it's not to say that that support won't work at your institution. Just make sure that you're comparing apples to apples in these supports before you do the work to launch. And next, transfer students are a very diverse population. And I know when we say transfer students, we're lumping them all into a bucket. And that's really not quite fair. Transfer students are a very diverse student population. So if we're having one fix or one support system to support all of transfer students, a very diverse student population, it will be impossible. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. And again, supports are generally designed as a one size fits all solution, when this is a not one size fits all problem. So moving into these barriers, this is the part where I want to practice your brain on how things might be a barrier when we aren't always thinking of them as a barrier. So first is adult learners. Let's think about adult learners might have children, they might be holding down a full-time job, they might be caring for elderly family members. There are a lot of things that go in, a lot of life problems that can be a challenge for adult learners. But if we flip that, adult learners can really engage in the classroom in novel ways to accommodate for the lack of time that they might spend on campus. And they have very rich personal experiences that they can draw from and be able to link that existing knowledge and make academic connections. Next is enrollment intensity. And I just started calling it enrollment intensity, but really it's full-time and part-time. And if you submit any research or data to the National Student Clearinghouse, you know that there are 5 or 6 ways that they can break down how greatly students are enrolled in courses. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're just going to talk full-time and part-time. And when it comes to part-time is a variable that really is rarely studied. And I'll go as far to say that it's generally mostly ignored when it comes to studies in college enrollment, because full-time students are easier to study. So really there's very little known about outcomes related to enrollment intensity. And that's not quite fair, because when we talked about the timeline, part-time students are increasing. So why aren't we studying them? So if you're studying your students, I really encourage you not to just pull out your full-time cohort. Gender differences. I will say this is a little bit a wishy-washy topic. Sometimes gender is a significant variable and sometimes it's not. It depends on other variables it's combined with, but still look at it. It's still worth noting. I'm gonna kind of skip past that one. Transfer shock. If any of you have heard of transfer shock, it's really what it sounds like when students transfer. There's a cultural shock, a phenomenon that goes on when they're kind of feeling, this isn't what I've always known. I thought I knew how to be a college student and now maybe I don't, or maybe this environment is different. I don't know what these forms mean. I thought I knew where the financial aid office was. Now I don't. So this is a theme that is heavily associated with college student attrition and transition and adjustment problems. However, again, most institutions report their retention and graduation rates based on cohorts from first-time freshman students, which makes transfer student persistence a little bit difficult to track. And transfer shock does live under that concept of culture shock, like I mentioned. And it really is defined as the failure to acclimate to academic and social factors. It can feel confusing, disorienting, and students might feel anxiety, paranoia, irritability, depression, low self-esteem, and the list goes on and on. Essentially, all of those things that I read are not characteristics you see in a very high achieving student. So we know they have a lot of roadblocks in their way. So instead, this failure to transfer really isn't due to academic ability. It's due to all of these outside factors that students aren't able to adjust to. So insufficient financial resources or not knowing how to ask to find the resources, poor transfer advising, lack of credit transfer. It has nothing to do with how academically prepared the student is. And again, like gender differences, transfer shock is also a pretty mixed bag when it comes to results. And the last one I wanted to include on here is articulation agreements. And you might be thinking, Sarah, that's actually support. And that's true. Articulation agreements are a great support if we have a direct map aligned from community college to four-year institution. But if you really think about it, these students need to come in They need to know what their degree is. They need to know it very quickly. They need to know where they're going to transfer. And yes, that support, that map can be laid out for them. But we need to acknowledge that not all students know what they're going to do. Historically, college has kind of been a way of self-discovery, trying to figure out what you want to do. But these articulation agreements are in a pretty rigid box, and that's how they need to be if you need students to get to and through and quickly and save their money. But I think we need to acknowledge that sometimes the supports that we've created aren't perfect, and there are also things that go along with them that serve as a barrier. So now we're going to kind of jump into to really this research mode. So I'll talk you through it. And this is the purpose of my study. I wanted to look at characteristics that community college students have as they transfer into a four-year institution. And I want to see if those characteristics led to graduation or if they did not. And I hope that this study and also this presentation might inform higher education professionals and policymakers on how to better set up these students for success. And I think ultimately, if we're able to do that and set up these supports by acknowledging the barriers discussed today, that we'll be able to see a higher rate of matriculation and then ultimately graduation and increase in bachelor's degrees. So here are my research questions. First, I wanted to know what factors, these characteristics that we've discussed, predict the likelihood of bachelor's degree graduation for these community college transfer students. And then the second question, I wanted to compare different types of institutions. So is there a difference if they transferred to a four-year public institution or a different university, like a for-profit, a private institution, a private two-year institution? So I really wanted to look at it from both angles. And I'll go through this one quickly. I really just included it because I wanted, if you feel like you didn't get enough in this presentation, that you can really look at some theories that are really good. These two theories help identify why students drop out of college. And for my purposes, I wasn't really able to get the answer with one single theory. So I looked at both Tinto and Bean and Metzner and combined those to really help get my answer and to explain student retention for transfer students. So Tinto, he really looked at social integration. He wanted to know if students fit in, if they had friends, if they had good relationships with their professors, all those feel-good relationship things. And then Bean and Metzner, they looked at environmental variables, and they were really focused on the non-traditional student population. And they wanted to know, and they looked at variables like study hours, family responsibility, and finances. So that's why I blended those two. You can look them up. There's a lot of things written about them. So I hope you all can read this. This is the model that I developed when I really view the transfer student process. So I'll walk you through it. We'll go from left to right. First, we see that students are leaving the community college, and they're leaving them with a bunch of student characteristics. So let me go to my next slide. So this is a zoomed in version, and that big box with student characteristics, they have a lot of those things like gender, age at first time fall enrollment, race and ethnicity. The list goes on and on. I'll let you read it, but they're carrying a lot of things with them, and some of them have more of these than others. And there's a lot that aren't even on this list. So we just need to acknowledge that they're not all the same. And so as they're carrying their bag of characteristics and demographics with them, and they're on their way to the four-year institution, they're really being able to see what institutional collaboration is like. Are their community college and four-year institution working together? And what kind of supports are available to them on the way? So they get here, they've matriculated, and then we can start looking at academic performance and their mindset and integration into this university life. Is it good or is it struggling a little bit? And these are really combined efforts. And that's why I presented the theories to you. They're looking at both sides, academics and also relationship factors. So the higher they are on both of these scales, they're going to have a higher institutional commitment. They're going to feel supportive, loved, and they know they have a better chance of success and confidence in earning that bachelor's degree. So they have a higher chance of earning that degree. If they're low on their academic performance and also their mindset and integration, they're not bought into the idea of college, there's no one talking to them, they don't feel successful, that decision to drop out increases exponentially. So I told you my outcomes and my research questions, but what I wanted to know is that did students obtain an associate's degree or obtain a bachelor's degree within 6 years? The 6-year number is really from national research, and that's about where we're sitting now. On average, it takes about 6 years to complete a bachelor's degree. But I don't lock that in your brain. I think it could change anytime. I looked at a bunch of variables and characteristics that I just discussed in that previous model. And I took my data from a community college in the Southwest region. They had an internal report, and it was combined with a report from the National Student Clearinghouse. So if you're familiar with the National Student Clearinghouse, 99% of colleges across America report their numbers up to the National Student Clearinghouse, and then they can be sent back to institutions. So you can really analyze where your students have been. So when you first started, you just had your view of the student at your institution, but when it's processed through the National Student Clearinghouse, it's easier to really track their journey. So I used a 2013 cohort because I needed enough time to see where they were 6 years later. This was my sample. Once I filtered all the transfer students out, there were about 1,000 degree seeking students. I did only choose degree seeking because non-degree seeking gets a little tricky because they're not seeking degrees. So when I'm measuring bachelor degree outcome, that's not a great population to survey. And then in this study, transfer students were defined pretty simply as students that moved enrollment from one institution to a different one. So here's what I found out. If you don't know what those numbers mean, it's okay.
Significant.
Yeah. So my first research question, let me remind you, is I wanted to know about those factors that impact bachelor's degree graduations for these transfer students. And when I looked at how many semesters they were enrolled in higher education, it was positive, which makes sense, right? You have to be enrolled in higher education to earn that bachelor's degree. So the longer you were, the closer you got to that finish line. Total semesters enrolled in a community college. For every semester enrolled at a community college, there's a corresponding decrease in odds of earning a bachelor's degree by about 20%. And we'll kind of get to that reason later, but really in this study, I found that community college is great, but you can't be there forever. And that's putting it in layman's terms. You really need to attend and then move on, and that to increase your chance of earning that bachelor's degree. Enrollment intensity, remember I defined this as part-time, full-time, and I broke it down a little bit more in this study. But for every unit increase in enrollment intensity, students were 4.9 times likely to have completed their bachelor's degree in 6 years. 4.9 times more likely to complete a bachelor's degree. So just jumping from part-time to full-time made a huge difference in bachelor's degree completion. And then I wanted to kind of take it back and put it in the associate's degree more in a box and put a timeline on it. I wanted to know if students were more successful if they earned their associate's degree in 3 years. And the answer is yes. Those that complete and within that 3-year time frame are 2.8 times more likely to complete their bachelor's degree. Now if we take that limit away, there's not a positive association, and it's not significant if students need to earn an associate's degree before they get a bachelor's degree. It's not necessary, but if they do it within that 3 years, they're much more likely. But I skipped concurrent. Concurrent were marginally related to bachelor's degree completion. But the students that were enrolled in concurrent courses in high school were approximately 50% more likely to earn a bachelor's degree. And really that makes sense. Your students that are enrolling in those concurrent classes are probably high achievers, and they're getting that idea of college and practicing how to do college much earlier, which lessens that transfer shock as they transition through. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong slides. So my findings for research 2, if you remember, that's comparing degree attainment for a 4-year public institution compared to other institution types, the others being 2-year public, 4-year private, and for-profit. If students transfer to a 4-year public institution, it is significant. They're much less likely to finish. And I will put a caveat on that. Any study has limitations. And I did this study in the Southwest region, which has a lot more opportunities to attend a 4-year public institution and much fewer to attend a private institution. So something to think about. Enrollment intensity. Again, anytime a student increased their enrollment intensity, they were 3.6 more times to earn an associate's degree. The number of institution transfers, this was not significant, and this was pretty shocking for me. I don't have my table in this that shows you how many times students transferred, but as I was going through and tracking the number of times these students transferred, I was really shocked. I mean, it was like sometimes it was 10, 12, and they really just moved through, and that's a lot of transfer, and that's a lot of transfer shock. And I'm sure I only had a very small piece of the picture, why they were moving that many times. Could they have been in the military? Could they have been struggling financially? There are a lot of factors, but transferring many times didn't seem to be significant in this study. Semesters enrolled at a community college, again, it was significant. So for each semester they were enrolled at a community college, students were 1.5 times likely to earn an associate's degree, which makes sense. And community college students that transferred to a 4-year public institution were more likely to have earned their associate's degree than those that transferred to other types of institutions. So public institutions have a greater number of students that have earned that associate's degree. In this question, prior concurrent enrollment was not significant, but prior enrollment in developmental education courses, or we sometimes call them remedial courses, was significant, but not in a great light. Community college transfer students with prior enrollment in these dev ed courses were 99% less likely to earn an associate's degree. And I think we're catching on to that. These students are almost labeled from the day they start to not finish. And there are a lot of issues with that. And I think there are a lot of movements made in trying to create co-requisites and kind of not put dev ed just into a single hole when we know they're not going to be successful, and we know they're not being successful currently. I'm gonna go through this. I'm gonna skip my hypothesis so we can get into the discussion. And this is the part where I want to kind of compare what the literature says and then what my study says. And so, and this is kind of the part where you need to take it with a grain of salt and practice that idea of asking questions, because not all circumstances are the same and we won't always get the same result. So when it comes to age, research found that adult students don't graduate, the degree completion decreases. But in this study, it wasn't a predictive factor on whether they gained either an associate's or a bachelor's degree. Race and ethnicity and gender, like we talked about earlier, sometimes they're a predictive variable and sometimes they're not. And it really depends on what other variables or characteristics they're combined with. Not all hard, sometimes they are a standalone variable being studied, but typically not. They're usually lumped in there with a bunch of other variables. Enrollment intensity, we saw that being a great predictor in both of these. But again, part-time enrollment is rarely a standalone variable. We usually typically use those first-time, full-time student cohorts. Even though the National Student Clearinghouse reported that 25% of college students nationally are part-time. So the closer that these students are staying, both nationally and in this study, to that full-time status, the greater likelihood they will have to earn their degree, either degree. We talked about some of these already. Yeah, we'll skip these. So I want to have time for questions at the end, which is why I kind of skipped a few of those slides. But before I do that, I want to leave you with some homework. So first, I want you to take a look at the transfer supports at your institution, and really a good look, because they're going to be labeled as supports, and maybe they are, but they're probably not a support for everyone. They're not a support for all transfer students. This is a very diverse population. So make sure that we're really understanding the barriers before we're creating those supports. And we're not just putting them in place because they look good or we think they're going to do good. To really create that systemic change, we need to understand where students are coming from before we're able to customize that support. Second, ask questions about your transfer population. There are a lot of institutions on this call, but NSU's transfer population is different from TU's, it's different from RSU's. They all have different characteristics. So yes, these national reports or these big reports and research is very helpful to help you guide a general direction, but to get all the way to really create a successful support, you need to know what your transfer students are like. And no one's going to be able to tell you that answer besides your own institution. And third, don't isolate yourself on your own island. It's okay to ask for help for people outside your institution. Transfer is generally not an office that's fully staffed with a bunch of team members. It's usually one, if we're lucky, person that's really looking at transfer every day. And you shouldn't have to feel like you need to solve this very complex problem by yourself. So that's part of the work of the consortium, to reach out and work together, because it's not just a community college problem or for your institution problem. It's all of our problem, and we really need to work together to solve that. So I'll take questions, and in that green box, I put the title of this dissertation. So if you really want to dive in and know some more numbers, you can just put that into Google. But I'll take some questions at this point. If you're going to ask for specific numbers, I'm not sure I'll be able to regurgitate them off the top of my head, but go ahead and ask. And or if you just want to share something that's going really well for transfer at your institution, I'd love to hear those as well.
Dr. Wyatt, if I may, the quick question I have is, have we come across a tool or any specific questions on maybe an application for admission that would help us best identify transfer students' needs. And then also obviously their fit for our institution, so that we're not just enrolling to say we have a number, but we're enrolling a student that will truly come into the environment that they need to be successful.
So I'm not sure I can speak to this from a national perspective, but if we're just looking at our Tulsa institutions in the consortium, we know that TCC has started doing a lot of that work on the front end, because we know that if students need to fall into these articulation agreements and stay on that successful course path, we need to know what their intentions are really early on. So TCC is now asking, where do you plan to transfer? Do you intend to transfer earlier on to kind of coach them through? And hopefully through that process, we're starting to identify some of those characteristics. But I will say the consortium is making great strides on our data platform. All 7 institutions are, as we speak, putting data into a singular system. So this study that I patchworked from national statistics and the community college will have that right here in Tulsa and be able to take a closer look at our homegrown numbers.
I'm
Dr.
curious
Wyatt?
to,
Go ahead.
oh, Mary, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from your experience in our consortium, what qualitatively, what say are the top 3 barriers you see for transfer students coming out of TCC?
Well, I want to say adult learners. TCC has a huge population of adult learners. And, I was an adult learner myself. And so I know that there are extra barriers such as childcare and working full time. And so we need to carry over those same kind of supports for the adult learners because TCC is used to that, but not all of our 4-year institutions are used to that type of population. I think financial barriers, and while Tulsa Achieves is lovely and it's great, it creates a dramatic difference when students are paying 0 and then they're transferring over to that 4-year institution. And that is a real financial shock that I don't think is strongly articulated to the students. I mean, they know the numbers are going to change, but do they know until their bill comes? Gosh, number three, I might just do loop it into the transfer shock. Things are different. Offices have different names. The same form you filled out at one institution has a different form name at another institution. And it can be really confusing to try to navigate just the jargon, which is really our responsibility as higher ed to fix that problem.
Thank you.
Sarah, I was curious, we know there's a lot of swirl in the metro area. Are you able to parse any of that out when you look at some of these studies to figure out, is there something we can do to help those students be successful as well and to matriculate and finish?
I'm not sure if I have the answer to that. And I would be interested to look at the swirl that's happening within the Tulsa area, which I hope we'll be able to look at in the next few months. But like I said, in my study, the amount of transfers, it wasn't significant to these students. And I kind of wonder if they just got used to it. Like, this is just the way it is. I never know what's happening from institution to institution. And so I don't know. I think a lot of that, to me, my idea goes back to marketing and kind of showing this united front that all of my institutions are in it together and working together, and it won't be such a clunky process as they move throughout the system. Because I'm not sure we can stop the swirl. We just need to be able to work within it. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I thought, this is Christy Prudnich, I'm at ORU. I thought I was on mute when I yelled significant, because it's so great to have findings, right? You say, oh my gosh, my research actually paid off.
Yeah.
No null hypothesis or anything. So congratulations, Dr. Wyatt.
No, if anything, you're yelling significant, just, motivated.
It was validating. Well, good. I think anybody who's done research like this understands what that really means. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I had a question about these development education courses, these co-requisites. And we've been looking at those like math co-requisites and other things.
Mhm.
Are there specific ones that are more effective or more helpful than there are? Have you looked at those specifically, where students need more support? And I wasn't understanding exactly how the research it was imposed on that. Was there significance in that finding?
DevEd usually lives in math and reading scores. In Oklahoma, we have a pretty significant number of DevEd students or students that need to catch up and get caught up. And a lot of those students kind of get trapped in that community college. So I think, there are a lot of four-year institutions on the call, and I think they struggle a lot with DevEd, but community colleges are the ones that are hit hardest because they think, well, we'll start and I'll get caught up and then I'll continue on. So I'm not an expert in this field by any means, but there are a lot of barriers when it comes to DevEd. Just the mentality of I'm not going to succeed. Also, if there are financial aid barriers, your financial aid clock turns on when you start taking those courses. So you might not your time might run out by the time you're ready to transfer to that bachelor's degree. So that's automatically setting you up for failure because there's no more money. You can't continue to go. So I don't know if there's anyone else on the call that knows more about DevEd and co-requisites than me, or how that's changing to help those students be more successful. Dr. Fly, are you a co-requisite expert?
I'm not an expert, but we did find that with a particular, we use cut scores with a particular set of students, the co-requisite was very helpful. The workshops doing that, and they tend to do it with the same faculty member that they're taking the class with. So it's almost like an extension of the teaching hour or time, and our pass rates are much better for the regular course with the co-rec as opposed to the DevEd course. There are certain DevEd courses, if you have to start with the lowest math course, there's no, we don't feel like you're going to be successful using a co-requisite model. But for the other students, our data has shown so far that they pass at a higher rate and they stay retained compared to students who just take DevEd.
So you're kind of working that relationship angle a little bit, following that same professor, or
we try to. It doesn't always work that way,
Yeah.
but it does help, I think.
Thanks for that. I have one more question.
Oh, go ahead.
You were talking about students, the correlation from students who go from part-time to full-time, and they were almost 5 times more likely to graduate. Is that correct? That was 4.7, I think, was the likelihood. I'm just thinking maybe collectively here. So we're in Tulsa, right? And so you have students who historically maybe are working full-time and will continue to pay for themselves to go to school and still work full-time. And then you have students who might go from a TCC to OSU in Stillwater and maybe would go from part-time working full-time to fully enrolled and not working, maybe even working part-time. So was there a correlation between students moving markets at all? Was there consideration for that?
I didn't study that in my study, but it might be. And then just remember that I mentioned that it's for every unit of enrollment intensity. So it's not just part-time and full-time. That's an easier way to talk about it. But the closer you are, and I kind of think it's more on your mind. You're going to class more often. It's becoming more of a priority, but I think that we can't continue to work within those structures. We know that part-time will never go away. If anything, it's going to increase. So while that full-time status sounds very exciting and it's easy to push students, we have to recognize that all students will not be successful full-time. And the closer and the more and more we're pushing some of those students to full-time, they might just drop out when they could have been successful at part-time. So take that with a grain of salt, if you will. Like, every single research number you'll ever read, always think about the extra variables and what else is going on.
Good, thank you.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up today. Thank you all for coming. If you have more questions or want to talk more deeply, you can look it up or we can schedule a call. And the same goes for the work of the consortium. Hopefully, maybe next fall, we'll have another one of these presentations that's talking about all these same things, but it's very Tulsa specific. And I feel confident that we can do that. So we can dive in a little bit deeper to what our Tulsa students are doing and where they're swirling and where they're graduating. So thank you, everyone. Bye.